On a Monday morning in March 2026, under a warm Jalisco sun, a man was laid to rest in a golden casket. 5 trucks were needed just to carry the flowers. Dozens of mourners, faces hidden behind masks, followed in silence. Mexican soldiers patrolled the cemetery walls. The man they buried was not a president, not a general, not a saint. His name was Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes. The world knew him simply as El Mencho. And in Mexico, his death did not bring peace. It brought a question, terrifying in its implications, that no one, not the president, not Donald Trump, not even the cartel itself, has yet been able to answer. What happens now? He was born in 1966 in a tiny rural community in Aguililla, Michoacán, deep in the heart of Mexico's Tierra Caliente, the hot land, a region whose name alone should have been a warning. He dropped out of school in the 6th grade, the son of a farmer, one of 6 brothers, with almost nothing to his name. Like thousands of young Mexicans before him, he crossed the border illegally into the United States, chasing the dream. But the dream he found was not the one his family hoped for. In 1994, he was convicted in California for conspiracy to distribute heroin. He served 3 years in a U.S. federal prison. When he walked out of that cell, he was deported back to Mexico. But prison wasn't a punishment for El Mencho. That was his university. Back in Mexico, he climbed fast through the criminal underworld, first through family connections in the Mencho Cartel, where he became a feared enforcer. Then, in 2009, when Mexican security forces dismantled the Mencho Cartel's leadership, most men would have run. El Mencho built something new. He called it the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG, and what he built, the world had never quite seen before. Within a few years, the CJNG had gone from a regional gang to the most feared cartel in all of Mexico. Under El Mencho, the violence reached a scale that stunned even hardened observers. In 2015, CJNG gunmen shot down a military helicopter with a rocket launcher. That wasn't just an attack, that was a message. We are not afraid of the state. We are the state. In 2020, they attempted to assassinate the chief of Mexico City's police force with grenades and high-caliber rifles in broad daylight in the capital. They pioneered weaponized drones. They planted roadside mines. They operated across 28 of Mexico's 32 states and had criminal contacts in over 40 countries. The DEA estimated the CJNG was responsible for a massive share of the cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl flooding into the United States. Fentanyl, the drug killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. El Mencho's fentanyl. And yet, the man himself, almost invisible. In an age where everyone leaves a digital trail, El Mencho left almost nothing. Only a handful of photographs existed, and most were decades old. He moved through Mexico like a ghost, never staying in one place too long, never fully trusting anyone. The DEA had a $15 million bounty on his head. He was their most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere. And still, he was never found. Until February 22, 2026. Tapalpa, Jalisco, a quiet mountain town about 50 miles from Guadalajara, the kind of place tourists visit on weekends for fresh air and handmade crafts. Nobody would think to look for the most wanted man in Mexico here. That was the point. For weeks, possibly months, a joint U.S.-Mexico intelligence operation had been closing in. CIA surveillance flights tracked movement across Jalisco. The U.S. Northern Command's Joint Interagency Task Force quietly shared intelligence with Mexican special forces. The net was tightening. In the early hours of Sunday, February 22nd, Mexican Army Special Forces moved on a lodge hidden in the hills outside Tapalpa. El Mencho was there, with a small, loyal circle of bodyguards. What followed was a firefight that lasted hours. When it was over, El Mencho had been struck by multiple gunshot wounds. He was still breathing. Soldiers airlifted him immediately, racing toward Mexico City. He never made it. Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho, died en route. He was 59 years old. 3 soldiers gave their lives in that operation. In the days that followed, as retaliatory violence erupted across the country, 28 soldiers and National Guard members in total would be dead. Over 250 cartel roadblocks paralyzed more than 20 states. Planes were grounded, schools were closed. Guadalajara, a city set to host FIFA World Cup matches just months away, became a ghost town. The man was gone, but the monster he built was not. 8 days after his death, on Monday, March 2, 2026, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was laid to rest at the Recinto de la Paz Cemetery in Zapopan, a suburb of Guadalajara, the city his cartel had terrorized and controlled for over a decade. The casket was gold, shining, ornate, conspicuous, the kind of casket you choose when you want the world to know this was not just any man. 5 trucks were required just to transport the flowers. They arrived the night before, almost all sent anonymously. Some arrangements bore the image of a rooster, a nod to El Mencho's famous love of cockfighting and his well-known nickname, the Lord of the Roosters. 8 mourners arrived in 2 black cars following the white hearse. They wore all black. They did not identify themselves. They did not speak to reporters. Mexican army soldiers surrounded the cemetery. The Attorney General's office declined to publicly confirm the burial location, citing security concerns. Local journalists reported that many mourners wore face masks, not wanting to be identified, not wanting to be caught. For an hour, a ceremony took place. A banda, the traditional brass music of Western Mexico, played. It was solemn. It was surreal. Within hours of El Mencho's death the week before, narco corridos had already been written about him. Ballads celebrating his life, his power, his fall. This is a custom in Mexico's underworld. The fallen king must be mourned in song immediately, as if the legend must be sealed into place before the facts have time to settle. Was it really him in that casket? The Attorney General performed genetic testing to confirm his identity before releasing the body to family. They said yes, but the whispers, the way whispers always do in Mexico, have already begun. In death, as in life, El Mencho was a man who provoked extreme reactions. For law enforcement and the families of his victims, his death was long overdue. Mike Vigil, former DEA chief of international operations, did not mince his words. He called it one of the most significant actions in the history of drug trafficking, comparing El Mencho's importance to El Chapo Guzman himself, and calling him one of the biggest drug capos in the history of global trafficking. Al Jazeera's correspondent in Mexico City called the killing a genuine triumph for President Sheinbaum, describing him as the undisputed head of the CJNG and the most powerful cartel figure still free in Mexico. But not everyone saw only a monster. In parts of Jalisco, in the rural communities where El Mencho was born, where the CJNG long played the role of shadow government, the mood was different. People spoke of him the way poor regions sometimes speak of powerful men who came from nothing, with a complicated mixture of pride, fear, and something almost like gratitude. Because the cartel built roads, it provided a brutal kind of order. It employed thousands of young men who had no other options. One local resident, speaking anonymously to a reporter, said simply, "He was one of ours. He came from the land. He never forgot where he came from." A criminologist at Northeastern University offered a colder read on the violent response to El Mencho's death, calling the cartel's wave of roadblocks and attacks a deliberate performance, an expressive demonstration of displeasure. Intimidation, he said, designed to make headlines, because making headlines was exactly the point. And the flowers, thousands of them, sent anonymously. Nobody wanted to be seen mourning El Mencho in public. But behind the masks, behind the anonymity, someone was grieving.
That too tells you something about the world he created. In the days after El Mencho's death, a different kind of war broke out, not on the streets of Guadalajara, but in the press conferences of Washington and Mexico City. At his State of the Union address, President Donald Trump looked into the cameras and announced to the American people, "We took out the head of Mexico's most important cartel." We, the United States. President Sheinbaum, at her morning press conference, was having none of it. "I already explained what the collaboration was," she said, her tone measured but firm. "Essentially, intelligence and information. The entire operation was carried out by Mexico's Secretariat of National Defense." This was not just a diplomatic correction. This was a statement of national sovereignty. Because behind the scenes, the pressure from Washington on Mexico City had been relentless. Since Trump returned to the White House, his administration had kept Sheinbaum in political ice.
In early 2025, Trump's administration designated the CJNG as a foreign terrorist organization. He threatened direct U.S. military intervention on Mexican soil. He demanded results. And Sheinbaum, to keep the Americans off her doorstep, delivered. She expanded CIA surveillance flights over Mexican territory. She accepted U.S. military advisors into the country on a limited basis. She extradited over 90 high-profile cartel operatives to the United States, including El Mencho's own brother. A U.S. defense official acknowledged to CBS News that the Pentagon's counter-cartel task force played a role, but was careful to add, "This was a Mexican military operation. The success is theirs." The U.S. ambassador put it more diplomatically, saying that under the leadership of both presidents, bilateral cooperation had reached unprecedented levels. One analyst summed up what was really happening with brutal clarity. He said Mexico was sending a signal to Washington that with continued intelligence sharing, Mexico can handle this. We don't need U.S. troops crossing our border. The message from Mexico City to Washington was simple. We heard you. We acted. Now back off. Whether Trump will, that is another story entirely. Here is where the story stops being history and starts being the future. El Mencho is dead. The CJNG is not. Mexico's security minister has confirmed that authorities have identified 4 top regional leaders within the cartel, and that 2 of them are considered the most likely to claim the throne. He refuses to name them publicly. He says only that they are under investigation, but the names are already circulating. Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as R3, is El Mencho's own stepson. He is 41 years old, California-born, and has spent his entire adult life inside the CJNG's world. Many believe the bloodline will hold. Then there is Hugo Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, El Sapo, the Toad, a regional strongman with deep operational experience and a loyal network of soldiers. Odias Flores Silva, El Jardinero, the gardener, is considered a key figure in the cartel's military wing, with command over a significant armed force. Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, El Doble, Double R, has recently been the subject of new narco-corridos. In Mexico's underworld, when the ballads start naming you, it usually means your star is rising. And then there is Heraclio Guerrero Martinez, Tío Laco, Uncle Laco, who reportedly lost a son during the very operation that killed El Mencho. If grief and the hunger for revenge are qualifications for leadership, he has both in full. But here is the terrifying truth that analysts are now saying quietly. The CJNG is not structured like a traditional cartel, with one boss, one pyramid, one clear line of command. It operates more like a franchise. 90 separate criminal cells operating under one brand, bound together by El Mencho's personal authority. El Mencho held them together. Without him, who does? If history is any guide, and in Mexico it always is, the answer will involve violence, a power struggle, possibly a fracture, possibly something worse. Because when a throne is empty, everyone who thinks they deserves it reaches for it at the same time. El Mencho is in the ground now, in a quiet plot in Zapopan, under the same Jalisco sky where he built his empire. He came from nothing. He became the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere. He died with bullet wounds in his chest, in a helicopter somewhere in Mexico.
And the world he leaves behind is more dangerous, more uncertain, and more unpredictable than it was when he was alive. Because for all his violence, El Mencho was also order. His word was law, and that law is now gone. Somewhere in Mexico right now, in a safe house, a mountain lodge, a quiet room with the curtains drawn, men are making decisions about power, about money, about who gets the throne and who gets buried trying to take it. And somewhere in Washington, Donald Trump is watching. And somewhere in Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum knows that the real test was never killing El Mencho. The real test is what comes next. The golden casket is sealed.
The war is just begun. If you want to know what happens next in Mexico, who takes over the CJNG, how Trump and Sheinbaum handle what comes next, and whether this is Mexico's turning point or the beginning of its darkest chapter yet, subscribe now. Hit the notification bell, because this story is not over. It's only just starting. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment below. Let us know what you think.